By the request of my friend Daniel, I now speak of Thomas Aquinas, philosopher and saint from the medieval period, and while not an exhaustive account or a terribly well-researched one, I've only read a chapter in Bertrand Russell and listened to a 40-minute podcast from the BBC about the chap, I've still got some thoughts to relate, and these are what I would give myself before I'd read and listened to those things, if I wanted to pass on the gist. So you can listen to if you like. 1225 AD, Aquinas born, and he was a big boy. Dumb Ox was his name, the ox part coming from the fact that he's quite a large fellow, a little bit like comic guy from The Simpsons, intellectual yet large, so he's not one of these slim, geeky Big Bang types, he's the big boy. It's hard to think of large intellectuals. I think of rugby players, but they're not terribly bright by reputation, whereas I can think of the Prime Minister David Lange of New Zealand. He was quite a large fellow, a lawyer, a little bit nervous to start off with, but not a philosopher per se, but, you know, his brain and brawn. Well, this is what we're dealing with here. Now, the poor old fellow was born near Monte Cassino, a place that New Zealanders and others bombed the crud out of during World War One. But that was some time to come. This is Naples. He's the son of the Count of Aquino. Now, the Count's plan for his son Tom was for him basically to be a pawn of the family. He was supposed to get in with the church, infiltrate it, rise to the top, become an abbot, basically a Trojan horse for the family, for the estate, for his father, pay lip service to the truth, to the Pope, to God, to the church, and secure lands for his family and favours for his family. So off he goes. Little bit of a problem, Saint Thomas Aquinas to be, he did not play the pawn part very well. This was too much of a cognitive dissonance for him. And I argue that he tried to reconcile the schism. He's trying to find a synthesis, whereas father versus the church, family versus God, estate versus the Pope, somehow stitches all together. And I think that's what drove him to be the great systematizer that he was, and to try and later make the truth, morality and reason and Aristotle compatible with the church, with God, with the Pope, when he replaced those things with his father. So the story of how he did that was he got in with the Dominicans, who were a little bit cult-like at the time, still not quite finding their stride. This was a problem for his father because he's gone native. Centre of the church, he's supposed to come back speaking the language and being a good Trojan for the family, and instead he's gone native. He's gone and turned into a real, actual, true believer. So they got him out of there. Now here's a picture of Guy, the bad guy from Name of the Rose. He's a Dominican, so he can be in robes like this. There's a bit of a clue of how these guys were dressing. They get Thomas out of there and try and deprogram him, a little bit like the movie Holy Smoke. So they get Harvey Keitel in there. According to some accounts, they get some cute women in there to try and bring him back to the secular land and away from where he is. And I guess that didn't work out, although they had 2 years to try and crack the guy. He did not come back to the family. He was not suited for that. But I think the damage lasted. So like Steve McQueen, he rides his motorbike over the barbed wire fences, and he gets away and he stays away. Trouble is, as I say, he reproduces this great cognitive dissonance, this big split. He's still trying to reconcile it. Possibly he doesn't realize that now now the Pope is his father and the church is his family, and that what he's trying to marry together and synthesize is this nasty, corrupt church that he must have increasingly recognized made little sense. But he wanted to make it sense. It had to make sense for this guy. And he became an Aristotelian geek. He had sources that others didn't, so he was able to bail out the Dominicans when they got into a little bit of a fracas with the church and pave things over. And he caught the attention of Albertus Magnus, aka Albert the Great, who had plans for this talented young fellow. And like a record producer, which takes me into talking about Emma Paki, which seems like an unlikely and obscure reference, but it's on my mind because New Zealand on Screen threw up. Maybe that's not the right way of saying it. they posted, they shared a post of the music video from the early 90s, System Virtue. My argument is, or my contention is, Summa contra Gentiles, which is Aquinas' great work, that's his System Virtue. Emma Paki had a song called System Virtue, and I'll tell you more about it in a moment, but his greatest, most important work, Aquinas that is, was to establish the truth of the Christian religion. Within this book there is the talk of the 5 arguments, the unmoved mover, to say to someone who doesn't agree with Christianity in a rational way, come on over, this makes sense. Well, I think System Virtue does that too, and perhaps I'll quote a bit of System Virtue in a moment, and maybe even play a little clip if it doesn't get me in trouble with APRA or whoever the music mafia are. But here's a poem from J.K. Baxter, New Zealand poet, from the early 1950s. It goes like this. This is called For Kevin Ireland. It's something I stumbled upon. I recognise the name Kevin Ireland. Oh, better read that one. I'm glad I did. For Kevin Ireland. Friend, if you have strength to praise the lion-headed incubus that grips your life and mine within its strict Egyptian maze, expect no lessening of pain, easy bed among the lies and coffee-house adulteries, only that your words will live. Emma Paki's words live. Aquinas, his words live. They're useful to this incubus, this lion-headed incubus, which I equate with the state, with the establishment, okay? That's the Egyptian maze that we are running around in, this culture of theirs. And you got a choice, and Baxter is suggesting if you lie down, if you lend your words to the establishment. I don't know what Kevin Ireland did, I wonder. Which way did he lean on this? Was this warning heeded or not? Anyway, Aquinas clearly siding with the establishment and becoming his Aristotelian artillery with a pen for them, and his words lasted and are still in use today. Emma Paki, her song will always play. It'll come back. When she dies, the news will play her song and remind us that she lived and died. This song is not going to die. The trouble is, I think they suffer for it. Now, Pink Floyd had this moment and wrote a song about it called Gravy Train. Look that up on your own time. George Michael, he's got a song called Freedom, and it was also put quite nicely by Missy Higgins, an Australian artist. Her song Scar, a triangle trying to squeeze through a circle. They tried to cut me so I'd fit. It's about being the pre-packaged pop princess that Anika Moa was later, in contrast to being the slim, woodsy, heterosexual girl next door with the pop songs. You know, who she turned out to be by contrast was a much larger, tattooed Maori lesbian. You know, she found out who she really was, presumably who she is today, is much closer to her true personality, and the pre-packaged, ready-to-consume album cover that we were all given, 15 years or so ago, maybe 10 years ago, that was not the real her. And I think being compressed like that hurts a person, and I think Emma Paki was hurt by forces beyond her control. And the way she leans in this song System Virtue, and her version of Aquinas is Summa contra Gentiles, I think that she was trying to reconcile that. She was, she didn't have J.K. Baxter's warning, and she fell for it. And here's some lyrics, although I'd like to play her singing it because it's much more poignant. Burnin' city, Babylon, disguise us. Public enemy in Babylon, guide us to freedom within world. So I think we're talking about the burning city of Babylon. Vaguely speaking, that's the great maze. That's the great Egyptian incubus, if you like. What was what was the words used by old Baxter here? The lion-headed incubus. Lion-headed incubus does have connotations to me with Babylon. I'm thinking about ancient history over there in the Near East. Public enemy in Babylon. I can't help thinking that's her. That's Aquinas. They are a public enemy. They're going to cause trouble and try and guide to freedom. I think they're talking about themselves there. System virtue all around the world I see in a TV box. Distant cousins beautiful. The sun is here going around you. God of nations at thy feet. I'm not going to work too hard to try and nut out what that means in this particular monologue. Basically, it's a lovely song to listen to, but I think what it comes down to is she's trying to reconcile the system. She's trying to say, it's okay, the system's virtuous, the system doesn't suck, the system's good, the establishment's just fine, let's all be friends. In contrast to my music video, the distant cousins are beautiful. You know, to look at them, they're all pretty scabby, tattooed, jacketed. You know, they're not, that's not my idea of beautiful, sorry. These guys do not look at ease with who they really are at all. They've got so much baggage. I think that's what being in a gang is kind of about, making up for a lack of identity. She's kind of breezing all over that and trying to pave over her culture and make it good, and her big advice, which, what do you expect from a young woman? Gather good vibes and you'll be cool. Let's be real and learn the rules. Gather good vibes and you'll be cool. Yeah, so does that solve your problems? Just gather good vibes, you know, accentuate the positive, eliminate the negative, think happy thoughts like Peter Pan or something. Learn the rules, be good. It sounds like something a kindergarten teacher is using to try and keep the kids in line, frankly. And it might work on those little kids for a little bit, but you know, when we've got some real problems, we need to get some real philosophy going and solve some difficulties, to grieve, to understand ourselves and others. And when we've got a problem in a relationship, you need to take action. This sounds dissociative to me. So I think it's a big pave over of the establishment, trying to make everyone happy, clappy, kumbaya. And I think that her effort to do that, just like Aquinas's, ended in disaster for her and for him. What happened was, I guess we go on, Emma Paki fell into the hands of corrupt music producers or something who wanted to pre-package her. Possibly she had some big clashes with her culture, with Maoridom, with her friends who perhaps used her in ways that she did not wish to be used. Well, this is Albertus Magnus, Albert the Great. I see him as the character. If you've seen the Matrix movie, there's this guy called the Architect who looks a little bit like Colonel Sanders from KFC. I'll just flash that onto the screen to remind you if that's relevant, and if it's not, don't worry about it. He sees this young fellow, this Aristotelian geek, this dumb ox, and he says, well, this dumb ox's bellow will be heard far and wide. Why? Why would this high-up guy, establishment chap Albertus Magnus, want to raise up this Aristotelian geek comic book guy? Because the world's changing and it needs a new superstructure. That's why. Now, that's a good bit that I heard from this podcast from the BBC. They're talking about how the Arabs are putting up a bit of competition. And that's a new world. A secure foundation for understanding the world was needed. Don't remember, I'll tell you. The Christian religion at this point is being propped up with Platonic ideas. Plato, Aristotle's barely being read. Haven't really got access to him until around about now, and Aquinas is at the forefront coalface of getting hold of these manuscripts and the translations. Now, the West has seen the amazing success of the Arabs, this Islamic philosophy, which is heavily into Aristotle, by the way. Their philosophy, their commerce, their technology, their buildings are rapidly developing, and similar story with the West. Our Western world was also developing beyond the capacity for this Platonic stuff. So they were looking for a new cultural technology, which is, you see why this reminds me of the scene in Matrix, the third Matrix film. So they see this alternative rival system at work in science and technology, and I don't know, the Pope says, look, Magnus, we're in trouble. These Islamic Arab dudes are going to kick our ass. And Magnus says, okay, I got a think tank over here. I've got this dumb ox, you're going to love him. So he brings him in. And he becomes a tool of the state. And on my diagram here is my big mind map. We've got two directions from there that this tool goes in. Now I'm going to start calling you a tool. I've got some sympathy for the guy, frankly, because I see him as having big cognitive dissonance, mistreated by his dad, and then goes off and he reproduces, recreates it. He's got a repetition compulsion to try and mend this big schism instead of letting the damn thing go. He couldn't let it go. But that has use. You can imagine a guy like this becoming obscure and never being heard of again, not becoming a saint. And probably there were Dominicans and Franciscans and guys around at the time who we've never heard of. Potentially their books are moulding away somewhere and they haven't already been blown up by New Zealanders in World War I. And they were not quite so useful. I think we know about Aquinas only because he was useful. So, when it comes to the Quinque V, his, the unmoved mover thing, the philosophical arguments, his book, his system virtue. As I said earlier, I think you're going to be disappointed if you're looking for philosophy in this show because this production of mine, it's just an assertion. It's mere assertion. Now, Bertrand Russell himself, he says that the guy deserves credit for presenting a fair and a forceful argument. He's really good at systematizing and packing a lot of connected material into the Summa Contra Gentiles book, but these merits don't justify his immense reputation. I'll tell you what justifies his immense reputation, which is not philosophy, it's special pleading, as Bertrand says. I fully agree. So that's why I'm not going to take on his philosophy, quote unquote. I'm not going to argue with that, though I could. But I'm not going to read the book. I'm not going to take it any further. I can see what's going on here. I wasn't going to change his mind based on reason. He's just trying. He's trying to provide reason and stitch things up, and it is a stitch up. It's a con job, unfortunately. How was he a tool? Well, just a few bits about how the church needed a tool like this to sort things out. There's a problem going around in the world, like perhaps child molestation, or at least wicked ministers. Sacraments that they give. So suppose you've been married or you've been absolved by some priest, then it turns out in a few years' time the priest was rotten to the core, and he gets carted away and his head chopped off, or whatever they do back in the Middle Ages. And then you're a farmer or some peasant on the farm, and you're asking yourself, okay, but that guy is the one who presided over me. Am I really married? Was I really absolved? So the church has got a big problem. Some people at this point were saying, we're going to have to find some decent, higher standard of priest. And, that's what leads to cults. That's what leads to breakaways, instead of sticking around with the main church. Well, that's a bit of a problem for the establishment. They can't have that. So they need some kind of bagman, some kind of intellectual think tank that's going to excuse and come up with reasons why this naughty priest, his work still counts and can't be discounted. And that's where our friend the dumb ox comes in. He's got arguments that can say that the sacraments are valid even when they're dispensed by wicked ministers. See? I don't need to get into that. That's what the effect of his contribution does. So what happens in 1273? I don't know. Something similar to what happened to Emma Paki, I assume. Some sort of X event where Aquinas isn't going to take it anymore, or he stops being a tool, he wakes up, maybe he copes with it by going on some sort of crusade. He's like, right, I've had it with you guys. Or maybe he just starts getting drunk, or maybe he starts breaking up and flaking out. I don't know. Something happened that year. But he died the next year, 1274. He's gone. So we don't really know quite what happened. And I'd quite like to be on the fly on the wall and find out what happened to the guy that wrapped things up. Was he going to change something? Was he going to remove his sanction from the state or something? We'll never know, I suppose. What we do know is that 50 odd years down the track, after being condemned, because, when he died, they just weren't that into him anymore, but then he becomes a saint. Then his Aristotelianism becomes the authority of the church, and in 1879 it was explicitly stated, the Pope decided, anyone in the Catholic world who teaches philosophy, you teach this. And if he isn't saying it, try and base what you're doing on what it looks like he would have said. It's compatible with Aquinas. So he gets elevated to this huge position. He's got this high standing as a philosopher, but he doesn't actually do philosophy. According, interestingly, as a footnote in the Russell book, where Russell himself spoke against Aquinas and spoke against Aristotle, and he couldn't even do it. Presumably that was in the 1940s. And a whole lot of Catholics gave him hate mail or called up and complained because it was so touchy even then. And I think it was Tom Woods that my mate Daniel showed me speaking and using Aquinas and Thomerian philosophy. Presumably that's just a hangover from being a Catholic and still believing this assertive nonsense. So, yeah, that's my story of Aquinas. That's how he got to where he was. He's a sad figure, the way I look at things. The same way I see Emma Paki as being a sad figure, and it's that bittersweetness of looking at her music video and listening to that music, which did have such promise, and wondering what the hell happened to her. Well, she didn't become a saint for it, but the state loves it, and seeing that New Zealand On Air logo stamped on there, that makes me angry. Oh, I wish she could have sung a different song and hadn't just said, gather good vibes, everything will be cool. Things could have been so much better. But hey, we can learn from these guys and perhaps do differently, and perhaps spread the sentiment of Baxter's poem around to where it can do some good. Oh, so yeah, that's one philosopher down, Thomas Aquinas. Not so much a philosopher as a tragedy milked by the establishment. Let me know what you think about this, if it makes any sense at all. Rick out.